Hello and welcome to Graduate Theory. Today's episode is a special episode. No guests on the show today. It's me and you. It's been nearly 6 months of weekly content. We've interviewed thought leaders, CEOs, and various other occupations from various different industries. There's now quite a collection of people and interviews that we've created here as part of the show. So I thought today, what better way to kind of mark the 25th episode of Graduate Theory than to kind of do a bit of a summary. Right, I want to go back and I wanted to investigate what have we done over the last few episodes and kind of what people have we spoken to, what lessons have we really gained from a lot of these people that we've had on the show. So often people have mentioned different concepts in different episodes, and I thought, can we collate a lot of these things, put them together and deliver them in one nice package for you, the listener? And that is what I aim to do in this episode. So in this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to go through 5 of the key lessons that I've learned so far from Graduate Theory, and I've summarized them as best I can. I've got insights from different guests that we've had on the show, different stories that have been told along the way, and different insights from my personal life and things that I'm interested in as well, to kind of add some flavor and add some a unique take on some of these topics. Before we get started today, I just want to thank my pod crew, some of my friends that have been riding this wave along with me over the last 6 months. Joe Weeby with the With Joe Weeby podcast, Luke Smith and Don Bullock and their podcast With the Chiefs, and Liam Hounsell as well. Been massive supports for myself over the last couple of months, and could not have got this far without you guys. So just wanted to mention you all at the start, and without further ado, let's dive into this episode. So the 5 keys, the 5 lessons that I want to talk about today, we've got the first one, proactivity versus reactivity. Right, proactivity versus reactivity. Time management is the second one. How can we manage our time better? Networking as well. What is your general practice around networking? How can we be effective networkers? Trusting your gut, right? What is the importance of doing that? How can we do that better? What are the pros and cons, I guess, of doing that as well? And finally, the 5th, personal branding. Okay, how can you brand yourself? How can you gain opportunities? What are kind of the steps? What does it take to brand yourself, right? So these are the 5 things, and there's been a lot of discussion on these 5 things across the episodes, and so today what we're going to do is get into a bit of a summary, and I think this is going to be quite powerful for those of you listening. It's going to be quite interesting. Certainly it was very interesting for myself when I was going through the content, trying to prepare a lot of this. I think there are some really powerful lessons in here and really powerful anecdotes from guests as well. So we're going to try and explain these as best as we can, like I said, using some of the information that guests have provided to drive the points home. And afterwards as well, something I'm really big on is kind of what are the actions that we're going to take from this? What actions can I take, and what things can I actually do? It's nice to have these concepts. It's nice to have the cool ideas, but what is the action that we're going to take after this? That's something that Aaron Garn says is, let's take some action on things, and often everyone knows what to do, but no one actually does it. So today I'm going to try and dissect these concepts and distill them down into things that you can actually do today, and things that will make a measurable difference on your life. So I'm excited to share. There's been obviously a lot of time invested in this podcast so far, and this really marks an important period, an important point in the podcast where I'm trying to summarize kind of a lot of what's been said. And really, if you're going to listen to any part of the show, any episode of the show, this is the one to listen to for sure. So let's do it. Before we start as well, each of these points is going to be time-stamped in the description of wherever you're watching, so you can go in there, and if you don't want to listen to a certain part, you can. The timestamp will be there, so you can skip around, come back to it if you'd like, whenever you please. Also, before we get started, I just want to say, if you do enjoy this at any stage, it would make my day if you could either leave us a review. If you're on Spotify, that has reviews now. Apple has reviews. Either of those would be great. And if you're on YouTube, leave us a like, subscribe to the channel. And one of the best things that you can do, folks, is subscribe to the Graduate Theory newsletter. So it comes out every single week. the episode comes out, the newsletter comes out with it. It's got my takeaways from the episode. I go through and kind of take away some of the really important things that I learned from the episode, and you get that straight to your inbox. It's almost saving you having to listen to the episode. It is quite good, and I do like the newsletter a lot. So if you're not already on there, I'd highly recommend doing that. Cool. Now, there's enough jibber jabber, James. It's time to get started. So, proactivity versus reactivity. This is the first point. Number one, proactivity versus reactivity. So being proactive rather than reactive is probably one of the most important traits that I've picked up during the episode interviews. Proactive guests and proactive people achieve much more than those who are reactive. Right? Those who wait for situations to occur to act versus those that act before they need to. This is a really critical distinction. People say you're either growing or you're dying, and this is kind of what we're talking about here. Proactivity versus reactivity. If you're not proactive, then perhaps you're not living your life to the fullest that you perhaps could be. So as a framework that we're going to go through these, we're going to go through a definition of what it is, example of the trait, and then some actions to take, like I explained earlier. So if we're going to define proactivity and reactivity, so we've got some definitions from the encyclopedia here for you, or encyclopedia, I don't think it's that, it must be something else. What is it? Dictionary. That's what it is. Okay, dictionary. So to be proactive is to act in advance to deal with an expected change or difficulty. And in contrast, to be reactive is to tend to be responsive or to react to a stimulus, right? So proactive, we're acting before the expected change or difficulty. Reactive, we're reacting as a response to this expected change or difficulty. So this applies in our careers. We can anticipate what is going on in the world around us. We can seek out solutions to problems, or we can wait until the problem has arrived and deal with it. So this is one of the key concepts, like I said, probably the most important thing that I've picked up from guests on the episode. They're constantly looking for new opportunities, new career paths, new adventures, new things for them, for them to try their hand at, new things that they could potentially be doing. If they're not happy in a job, they won't wait for permission before looking at alternatives. They don't stagnate, they continue to progress. And this almost becomes a mindset that these people have. They have a genuine belief that they can go out and get what they want, because if you didn't believe that, you wouldn't even try to go out and get the things that you wanted. It's almost like that growth mindset idea where they believe they can improve, so they're constantly looking for ways in which to test themselves. So let's move on to the examples. What examples do we have from the episodes? And the first of these is from Dan Brockwell. So Dan is one of the most exciting guests that I had on the show. He's very relevant to the audience. He's just a fantastic bloke. And Dan's advice was for people in the process of applying for startups and even companies more broadly, right? So when we think about applying for companies, you typically have the job board that you can get a job through, and then there's also referrals or like ad hoc introductions. So like you're a friend of a friend, you get into the company that way. That is a big part of it, right? And I think like 80% of jobs are filled through like ad hoc introductions. So it's really important to look at. But when I spoke to him, he said the following. I'm going to kind of paraphrase what he said, but I've got the quote here, and I'm just going to kind of read it and summarize it as best I can. So when he was in high school, he was conceptualizing an app with friends called Friends with Deficits, and they were trying to track debts between friends in different currencies. And they did some competitor research and found this company called Tilt. And he kind of saw that they'd solved this problem, but they had an ambassador group at the University of New South Wales. So, this is Dan. He's now proactive. He's seen this problem, but instead he's boom. Like, what is a way that I can turn this into a win? He emails the country manager in Australia, and he kind of said, "Hey, I'd love to join the ambassador group." And he said the guy he emailed said sure. So the country manager said, "Yeah, sure," and he joined the ambassador group. Dan then was a part of the ambassador group and converted that into an internship where he was leading the ambassador program with a couple hundred students across Australia. And it's just fascinating. Many people first off, most people aren't having ideas like that. But secondly, people who have those kinds of ideas, they're pursuing these things. Often they don't, you see the competitor and that's kind of it. Okay, we're done. Like, time to stop. But not Dan. He's seeing this. He's turning it into a win. What can I gain out of this? And he's being proactive in the face of a challenge. I thought that was really, really interesting. The second example comes from Warwick Donaldson. So Warwick also works in startups, but he used to work in the call center at ANZ, and he didn't enjoy working there. It wasn't really his life's goal to work at the call center. But what he did when he was there, he would sit down and look at the GAL, which is known as the Global Address List, and kind of it contains emails of like lots of people, or not lots of people. It contains the emails of everyone at ANZ. So you can just email pretty much anyone. So what he would do, he was there for I think 8 or 9 months. He would email people and he would say, "Hey, I'm interested in what you do. Do you have time to go out and get coffee?" And he worked his way through different like credit risk, market risk, traders, etc. And people were really receptive to what he was doing. I found that as well. When I reach out to people, they're receptive of what I'm doing, which is, you don't think that when you're not reaching out to people. But he found that people were really, really receptive. He worked his way through ANZ and eventually found his way to the ANZ Treasury. And they said, "Hey, we're hiring for a role actually." And then boom, he got a job there through just kind of emailing people and putting himself out there. And I think that is so important. Right, he's got this challenge that he's facing where he's not doing what he wants to be doing for the long term, and he's proactive. He goes out and gets what he wants. And so I think that was really great. And these are 2 examples of people that, in the face of a challenge, they didn't take a step back and kind of go into their shell. They expanded and were able to take on the challenge and approach things in a really cool way and get really cool results. Cool. So the next step of this, and the way that we're going to finish all of these, is with actions, right? So what can you actually do now as a result of hearing this, right? So proactive versus reactive, yeah, I understand that, James. That's all well and good, but kind of what can I do now as a result of this? And the first thing that I would say is understand what an asymmetric risk is. Okay, this is important, and it's something that I think it's a really cool concept. So we will take risks in life. Okay, we understand some things are risky. So the easy example to give here is like you're putting money in the stock market, right? There's some risk because you might lose money, but obviously there's some gain because like the stock might go up and you might make money, right? So there is some possible win and possible loss there. But so this would be like the stock market is, let's say if we had an equal chance of going up and an equal chance of going down, which it doesn't necessarily, but if you took that as an example, that would be a symmetric risk. Right, because the risk of it going down and the risk of it going up is the same, and so the likelihood you lose or gain is the same. So that's a symmetric risk. And then there's what we call an asymmetric risk, right, which is where the odds are stacked one way or the other. So you could have an asymmetric risk where there's not much upside but there's lots of downside, and then you could also have an asymmetric risk where there's not much downside but lots of upside. And the thing with networking and what these guys have done is these are examples of an asymmetric risk. And it's the best kind of asymmetric risk because there is no downside. It's only upside. So if you think about asking someone for a favor, or like Warwick was doing, emailing people and saying, "Hey, I'm interested in what you do," and he's got a job out of it, right? These are asymmetric risks because even if they said no, Warwick is still where he is. He hasn't lost anything. Right? So there's no downside to what he's doing. The worst they could do is say no. The best they could do is say yes. There are only upsides. And if you even wanted to call it a risk, which it probably isn't, it just feels risky to ask someone, but in fact there is actually no risk to doing some of these things. And I think understanding this and understanding the power of reaching out and this idea of what's the worst that could happen, it's easy to say, but it's hard to do. But if you can actually get in the habit of doing things like that, I think it's really, really powerful. And the second thing, understanding what you want. Okay, understanding what you want. Dan and Warwick both had quite clear intentions of saying, "Hey, this would be cool. That's something I want. How can I go out and get it?" Particularly with Warwick, he knew that he wanted to work at ANZ and in some kind of markets financial role, and he's gone out and he's achieved that. Right? Dan had clarity in his desire for internships and getting experience, and he was able to go and achieve that. So some questions to ask yourself, and these are quite deep. Perhaps you can actually, like, I would challenge the listener. I would challenge you to actually answer these because I think they're quite cool. So ask yourself what it is that you actually want. What do you want? And if you could ask for anything and receive it, what would you ask for? If you could ask for anything and get it, what would you ask for? And then, now that you know what you would ask for, who could you ask today to get closer to that? What could you do today to get closer to getting that? And I think if you could answer these questions and give yourself something to do today, then you're one step closer to getting the things you want, and you can start to understand that a lot of what is in the way is kind of in your head and not a real legitimate problem. Although, of course, those exist, but oftentimes, and I know for myself, a lot of the time it's been a mental game rather than something I can't actually do. A good thing to ask yourself is like, what would the best version of me do in this situation? Or if Elon Musk was transported into my body, what would he do in this situation? That's a kind of good way to get yourself out of those mental blocks. But anyway, we're off topic. We're off topic now. So the next thing, so now we've finished. Section 1 is done. Proactive versus reactive. That was a great little segment there. But what we're going to talk about now is time management. Time management. And I just want to mention as well, if you do want to read this later, it is available on the Graduate Theory website. So please, if you're enjoying yourself so far, please go and listen and read this afterwards. Everything is written down, so there's don't feel any pressure to sort of transcribe this yourself. All this is written down. So graduatetheory.com, episode 25, it's all there. All right, I'm going to need some water. I'm talking a lot. Okay. This is the second one, okay? Second part of this episode, time management. Probably one of the most important skills leaders must have today. We've all got constant pressure on our time, whether it's meetings, social activities, things we want to do outside of work, etc. Knowing how to get things done effectively is extremely important. And Adam Gahar is... we had him on episode 20. He is really the pinnacle of kind of time management. He's got fantastic processes around this. He's extremely disciplined with his time, and he's got a lot of things to say about how we can use our time more effectively. And he had this to say. He said, if you are not interested in the question of how to extract maximum value from those 16 waking hours, in my view, you are not thinking straight, and you're frankly not even on the field in terms of high performance. All right, so you heard it there, folks. We need to get on the field. We need to take this issue seriously. This is not just some mumbo-jumbo productivity nonsense. Right, this is what is going to separate you. This is what is going to take your career to the next level. If you can manage your time effectively, it is a skill that is going to last the rest of your life, and it is something that you're going to benefit from every single day if you can get it down pat. So, what actually is time management, James? So time management is the process of planning and exercising conscious control of time spent on specific activities, especially to increase effectiveness, efficiency, and productivity. Right? So that is Wikipedia's definition of productivity. How can we do that? How can we manage our time? How can we exercise conscious control of our time? Right? As Adam said, we have 16 hours every day, and so we want to maximize kind of these 16 hours. We want to get as much out of it as we can. We've got to squeeze the juice out of life. So some examples of this. So Adam's episode is fantastic, and if you haven't already listened to it, it is a really good episode. But in this episode with Adam, or in the episode with Adam, he gave many examples of things he does to be more effective with his time, and he's very serious with it. He's got very strong boundaries around his time, and so these are probably more advanced techniques than what the grads need to know, but certainly they give you some perspective on kind of the way that a high performer treats their time. So he says, don't default to 1 hour meetings, keep meetings as short as necessary. He has a predefined wardrobe, so he's wearing the same things every day. He might have 5 of the same shirts, for example. So he doesn't have to waste time thinking about what he's going to wear. He knows people that reverse their car in at night so they can get out faster in the mornings. He does things like brushes his teeth in the shower, gratitude at the same time every day, etc. So he's done a lot of these things to create routines in his life so that he can have more mental bandwidth to be able to do other things. He spoke about, doing this and using your routines, and he said, if you've got tasks that are routine, you should have routines to deal with them. You should have routines to deal with routine tasks so that they don't use RAM. And when he's talking about RAM, he's talking about kind of your mental bandwidth, kind of what you can use your brain to do. So you're going to get problems and tasks that are non-routine, for which you need to actually use brain power. And so it's important that you use routines to deal with routine tasks. So Another example of someone that is extremely productive and someone that really is great at time management is Penny Talalak. So Penny is extremely busy and she has her own tricks that she uses to get more done. So her first thing was surround yourself with people that are also busy and have side hustles like she does. Make sure you set your schedule using some kind of board or tracking system to track what you're doing. Break pieces of work down into small pieces and then plan your week in advance. And so these are all things that certainly you can do today, and certainly things that will enable you to get more done through the day. All right, so let's talk about actions. What can you actually do? And this is a kind of a special piece of this episode because I've been on a massive binge of Cal Newport recently. And if you don't know who Cal Newport is, he is this productivity guru, digital minimalism, world without email. He's got a lot of advice as well for graduates and people in their early career, university students too. He's got a lot of interesting content, and he's kind of known as this productivity guru, right? And so I've been binging through his podcast recently. In one of his recent episodes, someone asked him, if you were going to distill your productivity into kind of some steps, baby steps, what would they be? And so that he gave 7, but I've kind of narrowed it down to 5 because I thought the last 2 weren't super relevant, and I'm gonna paraphrase the 5 that he mentioned, because I think this is a game changer for your productivity. This is what I try and use in my career and in my time management, and I've found it to be very, very effective. So the first out of these 5 baby steps that Cal mentioned is a time block plan. Okay, time block plan. Every job needs time. Okay, so using your calendar, you can allocate time for each task that you need to complete. And if you get knocked off this time, you start at the current time and reset your plan for the rest of the day. So I actually spoke about this in episode 10 of the Graduate Theory podcast, and it was this idea of, often people use to-do lists as their way to track what they're doing and get things done, but you'll find that if you use that, at the end of the day, you almost always have things left on the list. Right, so you never really complete the but instead what you can do is you can say, hey, this task is going to take me 25 minutes, and then I'm going to schedule 25 minutes in my calendar to complete this task. Right, and then if at the end of the day, if I've planned my day well and I didn't finish anything, or I didn't finish everything, then, hey, I still spent 8 hours working, so I wasn't able to achieve that. That's totally fine. And I think this idea of time blocking and converting your task into and estimating how long it's going to take, putting that time in your actual calendar is way more powerful than just ticking items off of a to-do list. It brings a lot more clarity to what needs to be done at a given time, certainly. The second thing that Cal says is a task board. So you need a place to keep track of what it is you're doing, right? You need a place to keep track of kind of what things are on your plate, where are they up to, keep some notes perhaps. He recommends for each of your professional roles, you use some kind of board like Trello, Flow, Asana, etc. Some kind of board system is what he recommends. But again, this is not super important. What's most important is that you know what's happening and you have a place where that information is kept. So for me personally, I use Trello to keep track of what's on my plate. I have comments on my cards when something gets updated. I have my own system for doing that, and it's been very effective, right? Because it means I can just return to the board. I can see what's going on. I can see my comments of my updates on certain activities, and I think that's really powerful. Number 3 is Cal says to have a shutdown ritual. So at the end of each day, once you finish, so it's 5 o'clock, work day is done. After I've allocated time across the day, now it's time to shut down and kind of make sure that I've left everything in a place where I know it's kind of been ticked off, and I can leave my work knowing that there's no loose ends still hanging. So whether that's emailing, leaving comments in places, making sure that all my things are wrapped up, that is important, right? Because we want to have a clear separation for when is the end of the day. You don't want to have your work life seep into your personal life. So you want to have a clear end and say, hey, this is the end of my day. no more. And so making sure all those loose ends are tied, whether it's you've put emails in a certain place, allocated time in your calendar for tasks, moved certain tasks into a certain step, whether it's moving tasks to done or whatever it might be. Number 4 is having a weekly plan, right? What is my plan for the week? What things do I want to have achieved by the end of this week? Right, it's important to have that, and that way you can use that when planning your week, blocking out certain times during the week to do a certain thing. So if you say at the end of the week, I want to have achieved this big project and like I need this much time to do it, perhaps you block out like 3 hours in an afternoon for that, and it helps to do that at the start of the week before your calendar starts getting clogged up with random stuff as the week goes on. People can't just book time in there. It's important that you take control of your calendar, and if you want to have a time to yourself, book out time in your calendar so that no one else can book time in there. I think that is so important. And the 5th part, the last part, is having a strategic plan. Strategic plan, this is something that I think is really cool and something that you can return to when you write your weekly plan. But let's have a strategic plan for the quarter, right? For the half year, for the year, whatever it is, whatever distance you choose. Personally, I use quarterly because it's not so far. It's not so close that it's like too soon, but it's not so far away that I can actually, realistically, I can kind of see the end to a quarter, and it aligns well with kind of the workplace calendar as well. So you've got to write in here, what things do you want to have achieved by the end of the quarter? Right? What are your quarterly goals? What are your strategic goals? Put them in this plan and make sure that when you're referring to them, or make sure that you do refer to them during the weekly plan, when you're planning your week, when you're fixing things in your calendar, make sure that you refer to this so that you can know, hey, this is what I'm going to achieve this quarter. This is the time that I've set aside to complete the tasks that are here. I think that is so important. All right, number 3 is networking. Networking, right? So networking is a bit of a dirty word, right? But in episode 1, I spoke to Joe, and Joe Weeby, he had this to say about networking. He said, networking is a dirty word, but it's one I'm happy to use because every time I think about it, the way to do it most effectively is just at the end of the day to become a better person. Right? So the way to be an effective networker is just become a better person. I think that's fantastic advice, right? We don't want to be a snake oil salesman networker, right? Nobody wants that. You will get found out. So it's best to be genuine, best to become as best a person as we can be so that we can continue to make connections and grow our careers. So networking is kind of this ability to connect with others, right? Someone that is a good networker is good with connecting with other people, good at growing their network, but we don't want to do this in a nasty way or like the snake oil salesman way, right? Because like you can grow your network maliciously, like it can be done, but we don't want to do that. We want to be genuine. And some examples of this, so I spoke to Joe Weeby, episode 1, and he gave a great example out of the book Give and Take by Adam Grant. And in this book, Adam looks at different archetypes of networkers and kind of what's the most effective way to be someone in your career. What's the most effective way to network? And there are 3 kind of archetypes that Joe spoke to me about. There's givers, matchers, and takers, right? And Joe's example, he gave some examples in the episodes. Right, takers are kind of what's in it for me, right? So what is in it for me? There's got to be something in it for me to be willing to help. And then matchers are like traders, right? There's got to be an even exchange of value. So if like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It's got to be 50-50. Like I've got to be getting something, and it's got to be equivalent to what you're getting for us to continue. And that is a very common thing to do. And the third thing is givers, right? Someone that just gives with no expectation of receiving in return. Right. So Joe said he said he thinks everyone's benefit is linked to everyone else in the big picture. But the fascinating thing I think about is if you expand your thinking and you think long term, normally other people's advantages become your advantages too. So I think that was really powerful, and it's certainly interesting, if you think about yourself as a networker, do you expect something in return, or are you a giver? Are you someone that just contributes with no expectation of a return. And someone who does that, someone who is a giver, is Haynes D'Souza. So Haynes was a massive help for myself early on in the podcast. We had him on the show, and he continues to be someone that almost mentors me in some sense, someone that is always watching what's going on and giving me some advice. So I really appreciate him and his impact on the podcast. But when we spoke, he spoke about people reaching out to him. So he is someone that he works at Airwallex. He's kind of a well-known guy, and people will reach out to him and ask him for stuff. And so, he gave this advice. He said, you've got to be careful when cold emailing and cold reaching out to people. Because this is like one of the things about networking, right? Is like, if I want to meet someone, perhaps like for the podcast, I do it, emailing, reaching out to someone cold. And this is common, and this is something that we can all do more of, but there are things that you must abide by when you are reaching out to someone cold. And Haynes says you've got to be very careful when you do this, and there are kind of two things that you should be careful of. And the one thing that he looks for is this person legitimate? If he says yes to what they're asking, will they take it seriously, and will they show up on time? And the second thing is what do they want to get out of it? Why are they reaching out? Do they just want to have a coffee and get referred to a position, or do they have some actual genuine interest? So he said, when you're reaching out to people, please be clear on what it is that you want to get from people's time. You've got to be wary. People are busy. What exactly do you want? Let's get clear on that before we start reaching out to people. So how can we get better at networking? How can we get better at this? So this is a very important skill, and one that it certainly pays to be better at. So I think a big part of this, and one of the angles I'm going to take, is how can we get better at reaching out to people that we haven't necessarily met, but people that we want to meet. Okay, I think that is important. Similar to Warwick and Dan right at the start of this episode, we were talking about how they were reaching out to people that they didn't necessarily know, or they were reaching out with seeking opportunities. And I think getting good at that is really important and is a fundamental skill when it comes to networking. So this is something that I do for the podcast. A lot of the guests that I've had on the show I didn't know before reaching out to them and asking them to be on the show. Sometimes they're referred, but sometimes, and usually, they're just people that I say, hey, you're interesting. Would you like to come on the show? And there are certain ways to do that that are effective. And one of the templates that I use to do this is from Dave Perel's podcast. He has a podcast invite email, and it's linked. If you want to go and look at this on the blog post, it is there. So what he does, when you're reaching out to someone cold, start with a specific praise. What is something they've done recently? Do they have a blog out recently that did well? Did something recently happen in their life? Start with that. Show some interest in them personally. Then you can introduce yourself, say what you are, and what do you want from them. And then social proof. So say something about, I had this person on, or I know you through this person, or whatever. Some kind of proof that just shows, hey, I'm reasonable. I'm not just some random stranger. I actually do have something to offer here, and there is some level of proof that, hey, I actually do know what I'm talking about. And the next part is a plan. Let's have a plan around, okay, yes, I'm interested. What are the next steps? Right, what are the next? And let's talk about this. Why am I reaching out? I want to speak to you about this, or I want to do this with you, or I want to discuss this, or whatever it is. That's got to be quite clear as well. And then the outcome. What is going to happen as a result? I'm confident that, and in here it says confident I can provide this for you, confident that we can have a great discussion, whatever it might be. Let's finish with an outcome. So this is a template that I use for my podcast when I'm reaching out, and just to have those things that say, hey, when I'm reaching out to someone, I want to say this. First of all, because I actually want to be genuinely interested in this person. Otherwise, I don't want to reach out to them. And secondly, I think it's important that you treat the person, like Haynes said, with respect. Right? We want to respect people's time. When I spoke to Dan Brockwell as well, he mentioned some tips when reaching out. Probably he used some of them when he was reaching out to these guys like we mentioned in the first point. But he said, make sure you include who you are, why you're reaching out, and what is in it for them. Key. And use the following techniques, right? Provide value, so you could suggest an improvement to the business perhaps, or suggest an improvement to the app that they're building, or whatever it might be, and then have a clear ask. What exactly do you want them to do? And say it in a way that they can accept, right? So would you be open to this. This is what Dan said. Would you be open to having me as a marketing intern? No one wants to be closed. That's what Dan said. So ask them, would they be open to doing this? That is an effective technique. Trusting your gut. Number four, trusting your gut. Okay, what does it actually mean to trust your gut? Well, we spoke to Michael Gill on the podcast, and he said you have 3 ways of knowing. 3 ways of knowing. That's your head, your heart, and your gut. Okay, your head, your heart, and your gut. And you've got to keep them all in balance, right? You've got to keep them all in balance. The gut is that feeling inside your stomach that you get when you're doing something you shouldn't be, or things aren't going as well as they could be. You've got to listen to your gut. And some examples from the show, Lydia Ranieri is one such example. So Lydia used to work at Goldman Sachs, but it turns out that she actually initially started her career in law. She had her first job out of university. She was working at a law firm, and she thought that she was kind of made to work in law. And she was doing it for 3 months, and then she knew she had that feeling in her gut that said, hey, this is not for me. And she told her friends and family that she wasn't going to do it anymore because she had that gut feeling. They were all saying, you're silly, like you've got this fantastic career ahead of you, what are you doing? But Lydia pushed through, followed her gut, and then she went on to have a fantastic career at Goldman Sachs, and now she's a coach, and she's got a fantastic career. So certainly following her gut, and she knew at that time, this is something that is not for me. Act on it. Act on it is so important. I also spoke to Andrew Akib. Andrew is the CEO of Maslow, which is a disability and accessibility startup. And he said too, follow your gut. Follow your gut is so important. This is what he said. So the thing you're thinking about doing, don't just kick the can down the road and keep thinking about it. If there's something you're thinking about, just do it. He said he would have started Maslow a few years earlier if he did this, right? And he said you're either going to start it or you're not, right? You either will or you won't. So if you are going to do it, you may as well start it now. And I thought that was really great advice. And coming from him, he really stressed how important it was that he trusted his gut, and he wished, looking back, that he had done that sooner, because he had that feeling, but he pushed it away, and he's glad that he finally acted on it. But he wishes he was in your shoes. The person listening to this, he wishes he was you, and he could go back and act on that thing today. So another guest spoke that gut feeling, and that was Mel. Mel Kettle was the most recent guest on the show, and she had this rule. It was called the 3-night rule, where she was saying, if something is deep inside my gut and it is keeping me awake for 3 nights in a row, it is time to act on that thing. So if it's keeping me up 3 days in a row, 3 nights in a row, then it's time to either quit the job, leave that partner, do that thing, start that channel, whatever it is. 3 nights in a row, that is the warning sign, right? Your body's going to tell you when things aren't right. And this is a great rule of thumb that you can use to start acting on this information. So what are the actions from here? I would say pay attention to your gut. Right, and if it is, I would honestly just use Mel's rule. I think that was really, really great way of looking at it. Is if something is keeping you up for 3 nights in a row, folks, it is time to make a decision on that thing. It is time to do it, time to start it, time to quit it, whatever it is. Your gut is super important. As Gilly said, you've got those 3 ways of knowing, and it's important that we act on them. Okay, it's important, very important. Don't be like Andrew, where you've had that idea for so long and you haven't acted on it. Do it now, folks. Do it now. Do it now. All right. We've got the last one here. Number 5, personal branding. Personal branding. All right. This is huge, and it's something that now with the invention of modern technology, there is nothing stopping you from having your own personal brand. Okay, so personal branding is all about creating an avenue for people to know you, right? You want to shift from a consumer, someone that just watches, reads, whatever, to someone that creates, someone that shares, someone that is known amongst the community. And we've had plenty of guests, who have spoken on this topic. And the first one is Dan, and I keep referring to him a lot of the time, but Dan Brockwell is someone that does this extremely well. And the reason why, one of the reasons I like Dan so much is that he practices what he preaches, right? He is someone that he doesn't just give advice, he is living that advice day in, day out. Dan has an incredible personal brand. Lots of people on LinkedIn follow him. His posts are extremely engaging. So if you're not already following Dan, I don't know what you're doing, but you should get on LinkedIn, get into early work right now and follow this man because he is exceptional. And when I spoke to Dan, he was speaking about the importance of a personal brand, and he was saying that an online personal brand allows you to get your story out to people in a much more scalable way. It allows people to find out who you are. And he said it's finding out who you are, but there's actually, some switches to this, right? It's actually who knows you. Who knows you? That is powerful. Who knows you? And then he said there's an even further modification to this. Who knows you for what? Who knows you for what? Okay, this is so important. Ask yourself that. Who knows you and why? Who knows you for what? Now, having an online personal brand will get you these extra shots on goal. You'll have access to more opportunities. You'll be able to get into certain places. You'll be friends with certain people because of putting yourself out there and contributing to kind of the ecosystem of information, and I think this can open up fantastic opportunities. Dan had offers from Google just through his personal brand, not from any someone came and asked him to work at Google, not for any particular reason. So aside from his personal brand, so powerful stuff. Eric and Aiden as well. I spoke to them in episode 9, and we spoke about like mental health and careers, but they had some great things to say about personal branding, and in their book called The New Job Code. The New Job Code was their book that they wrote, and they had some great things to say about personal branding as well. So Eric said, when I was close to graduating, he had a mentor at the time, someone that he'd sought out, and some advice that this mentor gave him, which he took 2 years to act on, which was to build something to create a visible identity or something that you could be proud of outside of your role, because it gives you confidence, and it requires that you build skills to create that thing, and it means that you're visible. And Eric and Aiden said the same thing, and that they wish they'd started doing something like that earlier. It's these things that people wish they started doing earlier, that you have the power to do that today, folks. You have the power to do that today, so get amongst it and start doing some of this stuff. And Adam Ashton he has a podcast called What You Will Learn. It's like a book summary podcast, and they kind of read books. Him and his co-host, who's also called Adam, they read books and they give their summary, right? And he had a really interesting insight into kind of the way that you could start to create that wasn't necessarily so much pressure. Like if you're someone that's creating, it's hard to go from 0 to 1. It's hard to think of new ideas. Right, new ideas that's never been said. It's hard work. So he had some really interesting insight where he said a good middle step between consumption, which is kind of the 0, and creation, which you're saying is kind of the 1, right? 0 to 1. He said a middle step between consumption and creation is curation. And this is what he said. Like this is kind of where they went with the podcast, right? So they're learning and they're curating the books. So they'll read a book and they'll curate the knowledge from the book and then release it. So it's not like they're creating something completely new, right? But they're curating what's already out there, and that enables them to be effective and efficient creators without necessarily having a lot of the effort and the mental. It takes a lot of it takes a lot of effort to create something completely new. So I think curation is a really great way to get started. Absolutely. So what actions can you take? What can we do now, folks, to start our personal brand? So many people don't have some kind of personal brand. They haven't really made many steps to start creating something like this. So I had some questions here. What can you ask yourself to start doing something like this? What steps can you take to start creating? And some of the questions I have here: what am I interested in? What are you interested in? What do I tell people about? What are my conversations about? What do people ask me for advice about? What do people ask me for advice about? If I was a YouTuber, what would my videos be about? If I was a YouTuber, what would my videos be about? And if I had a Substack, or if I was a writer, what would I write about? So if I was a writer, what would my writing be about? If I was a YouTuber, what would my YouTube channel be about? What am I interested in? What do people come to for me to advise about? These are all great questions to kind of get the ball rolling and things that, hey, I could write about this or I could write about that. And this is the start. Start doing something. Start contributing something. And I think a great example of this is myself, right? It's important to remember that people who now have some kind of public image, whether it's Dan or people on this podcast or myself included, there was at one stage where they did not have what they have now. They started from zero, and I'm an example of that too. I didn't have no one really knew who I was, and I've kind of gone out there and started contributing. I found an area that I was interested in, and that was how can we empower and grow young people's careers. And that's what I'm doing, and I'm trying as best I can, and doing that, contributing to the knowledge that is around, and adding my little touch onto the world is something that we can all do. You all have that place where you can add some value to someone, and I think that's really cool. And I'd highly recommend that people go out and start doing this. Step out and share your abilities with the world. Be proactive. Be proactive. I think it's so important. Well, we've been chatting for a while now. It has been, you've done well if you've made it this far. Thank you so much. You've listened to me for nearly an hour, so thank you. Thank you so much for putting up with me for this long. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you found some value in this podcast. And we've gone through a lot. We've gone through a lot, to be honest. So if you did miss it, or if you want to recap some of the content that we've covered, this post, all this information you've heard is in text format, and it is on the Graduate Theory website. So please go there, find what it is you're looking for, and you can reread it, do whatever you want with it. It's all there, and share this episode far and wide if you did enjoy it as well. It would mean a lot to me. And like I said at the start of this episode, please review the podcast on Spotify, review it on Apple, like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, and wherever you are, please subscribe to the Graduate Theory newsletter, right? You get emails like this, episodes like this, direct to your inbox, and it comes with my takeaways. So it's not just the episode. I'm going to go through, I analyze the episode, find some key parts that I thought were really insightful, and I add them to the newsletter. So get on there, subscribe to that. Yeah, and I just want to thank you again for listening. It really does mean a lot to me. If you're still listening, email me, let me know what you thought. My email is james@graduatetheory.com. So go there, send me an email. I'm happy to chat to anyone that has any thoughts. Yeah, thanks again so much. Yeah, we'll see you around.